I guess another one of these frameworks that has moved, I think, from government to big tech is the worry of censorship, which is, no one is really worried about, no Republican is worried really about Biden or the Biden administration censoring them, or their local, their state administration censoring them. You're worried about Twitter censoring you, or or Facebook or Twitter down regulating your posts or something like that. And this is something I want to talk to you about, because I sometimes get messages from my followers saying, I think you're being shadow banned. I think your posts are being down regulated. I haven't been seeing your tweets. And I don't know to what extent that is paranoia. I know certainly some of it must be paranoia, but quite possibly a lot of it is true. And, just the other day, I think it was 3 days ago, there was a Daily Mail story about how the Scotland police are, as a policy, are now allowing suspected male rapists to identify as female. In other words, people born male that have been arrested or convicted of raping a woman to identify as female. So, okay. So this is a classic culture war clickbait article. Moreover, J.K. Rowling is on the thumbnail. She's commented on this, saying this is Orwellian. Okay, without getting into the actual topic, 6 hours after this was posted on Daily Mail, which has over 500,000 followers, it has only 6 likes and like 10 retweets. And the reason I came across this is because the JK Rowling hashtag was recommended to me, right? So it's JK Rowling is trending. Twitter knows that I'm a sucker for a good JK Rowling controversy. So I click on it, and this is one of the first posts that comes up. So clearly it's recommended to me, but I see it was posted 6 hours ago and has an unbelievably low amount of traction, right? Like I could, with a third of the followers, I could get 10 likes in 30 seconds on something far less interesting. So, so how close attention have you been paying to the problems of censorship or diet censorship, down regulation? What do you make of all this?
Yeah, I think you raised some really interesting points there. I actually saw that story too, and I'm trying to remember how it hit my radar. I follow a pretty politically diverse set of people, and so I don't know what the algorithm thinks I am at this point, but you make a couple points there. First, I do think that the accounts for the media properties themselves often seem to have far lower engagement than the influencers who talk about the same thing. And I've often wondered why that is. I want to be totally clear that one of the challenges we have when we try to understand these dynamics is that we're not getting, we can ingest tweets is what it's called. We can use the API and we can pull in public data and we can look at the substance that is put out into the world. But what we can't see is anything related to what you're asking as far as what is shadow banned, what is flagged, what is deprecated in some sense. This has some interesting challenges, which is sometimes it looks like something is overrepresented. We just did a study of some Chinese linked accounts. There are still tons of state actors playing in this game. Tweeting about Xinjiang and cotton, right? And the idea that the Uyghurs are living these blissful lives and they're just constantly putting this stuff out there. And it doesn't actually surface, it does not hit the radar. And we don't know if that's because it's been throttled in some way because there is such a high prevalence of low quality accounts putting out the content. We can't see any of that. Other times people assume that it must be having impact simply because the tweets exist. Or we treat engagement as a proxy for influence or impact, when in reality, we also see accounts where it has almost no followers, but tens of thousands of likes, and then that looks more like there's some sort of click farm coming in. So it's really hard, I think, to make any kind of reasonable systematic assessments of the dynamics that you're talking about, because we just don't have visibility. And that, I think, is one of the key challenges with understanding the information environment we're in. everybody feels that they're shadow banned. That's a really interesting phenomenon. Conservatives feel it, liberals feel it, all different types of kind of identity or civil society-based groups feel it. And it's, it's an interesting phenomenon per your point about, is it paranoia? As far as like the censorship versus censorship light, this is actually the question that I think is really interesting, is the idea of, is there a way to create some transparency around the structures that lead things to be surfaced that is independent from the substance, if that makes sense? So rather than talking about this theme, that hashtag, this thing, that political point of view, is it possible for us to gain some better visibility or potentially even redesign, giving users much more control of the sorts of factors that feed the algorithms that curate content for us? There is always a weighting function there, right? Short of, if you turn your feed to reverse chronological, the problem should be solved. You should see the things from the people that you follow in reverse chronological order. But most people don't actually want to do that because they want to see the good stuff, right? They want to see the stuff that's engaging, that people are talking about. And so the curation there is looking at things like what is getting engagement. When I talked to Shahid about his hashtag, one thing that he said to me that was really interesting was that nobody engaged with his policy tweets, that they would just go by, and per your point, he was like, nobody ever sees them, nobody ever engages with them, nobody likes them. I have this many followers, but nobody reacts to it. But when I put out something fiery, when I add that moral righteousness, that indignation, that kind of that people then pick up and amplify because they're like, yes, I am right there with you, that goes viral. And so in an interesting way, I think we have this question of what are the inputs that go into that curation that make your followers or some of your followers see or not see your stuff. We don't have any understanding of that. And I think at this point, the better conversation to have as we think through what do we want the social media environment to look like, is actually questions just like that. Do we want to have much more granularity for user control so that people can make sure that they see the accounts or people that they want to see, if only to mitigate the allegations that some sort of mass censorship regime is happening? Might that be a way forward towards, like, creating a perception of of good faith and of tech companies as not being like out to get you?
Yeah, is there like a model of a tech company that you think is doing it right or doing it right relative to others that you think can be replicated or something like that?
I think Twitter research is a really interesting thing. I mean, they're doing research internally and putting it out. Not, I mean, I'd like to see more, but again, it's sort of the early, the kind of early days of them creating that transparency. I think Reddit is also interesting in this regard. It has a kind of overlayer of moderation, but then a lot of it is the culture established by the mods in the subreddits, right? I think this is not a social network, but I've been really intrigued by Wikipedia's model. And you mentioned your reading of the CDC kind of inadequate communication on Omicron, and I'm very sympathetic to that. I feel like we're in an interesting environment where we're all looking for information, and sometimes when you just search for a term, what's going to surface is the thing that's been most engaged with, which is not always the most accurate thing. Often it's just the most outrageous thing, or the thing that the algorithm rewarded, and it got a lot of likes. Um, I think Wikipedia is interesting in that there's like an edit history. There's a version control, if you will. You can see a conversation and a debate about how a sentence was added or removed, particularly for controversial topics. It's not perfect, but it at least gives people a sense that they can see the debate at work around how the consensus was formed in a particular, for a particular understanding of a topic or an understanding of a situation, particularly if it's a thing that's really rapidly evolving. So I think there's kind of two things here. One, how do we decide what should be popular, what should be curated up? Is that a thing that we want centralized within tech companies? Do they decide? Or do we want users given the power to do those rankings for themselves? So that's one thing. And then the other thing is on this question of consensus and ranking in, and arriving at a shared truth. And that's where I think that Wikipedia model perhaps creates a sense that the situation is evolving, the world is changing, but here is our best understanding of a thing at a time.